the man nobody wanted. Lee Van Cleef spent 15 years in Hollywood getting punched in the face by bigger stars. That's not a metaphor. He literally got beat up on screen for a living. While John Wayne was making $750,000 per picture, Van Cleef was lucky to get $350 for a week's work playing another nameless gunslinger who'd die before the third act. The numbers were brutal. Between 1952 and 1965, Van Cleef appeared in over 90 productions. He died on screen in most of them. Shot, stabbed, hanged, thrown off cliffs. Meanwhile, Wayne never died. Not once in that same period. Wayne was the hero. Van Cleef was target practice. Van Cleef's face didn't help. Those hawk-like features, the sharp nose that had been broken in a car accident, eyes that studio executives called sinister. One casting director told him flat out, "You'll never be a leading man with that face." Wayne, on the other hand, had the all-American look. Square jaw, easy smile. The face that sold war bonds. The rejection letters piled up. Van Cleef kept them in a drawer. Each one said the same thing in different words. Too menacing, too ethnic-looking, not heroic enough. One producer actually wrote, "He looks like he'd rob his own mother." This while Wayne was getting scripts delivered to his house by studio messengers. Van Cleef was painting houses to pay rent in 1964. A decorated World War II veteran who'd served on a minesweeper, he was spreading primer on suburban walls while Wayne played war heroes without ever serving in combat. The irony burned. Wayne's perfect system. John Wayne didn't just dominate westerns. He controlled them. By 1960, Wayne had approval over scripts, directors, and casting for most of his films. He had a system. A very specific system, and that system had no room for actors like Lee Van Cleef. Wayne's westerns followed rules. The hero stands tall. The villain is clearly marked. Good conquers evil. America always wins. Wayne personally vetoed any script that challenged these rules. He turned down roles where his character showed weakness. He refused parts where the hero questioned authority. He wouldn't work with directors who wanted moral ambiguity. Van Cleef represented everything Wayne's system rejected. Those sharp features suggested complexity. That lean frame spoke of hunger, not heroism. When Van Cleef appeared on screen, even as a villain, he brought questions. Why did this man turn bad? What drove him here? Wayne didn't want questions. He wanted answers. Simple one. The production notes from Wayne's films reveal the control. On the Alamo, Wayne personally selected every supporting actor. Not one had features that might upstage him. On The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Wayne insisted his character be portrayed as noble even in defeat. The director complied. Wayne's name sold tickets. Van Cleef auditioned for 5 Wayne productions between 1959 and 1963. Rejected every time. The casting notes, when they survived, were telling, "Too intense. Might confuse audience sympathy. Face too memorable." That last one stung most. In Wayne's world, only one face should be memorable. The political divide. Politics made it worse. Much worse. Wayne was Hollywood's most vocal conservative, president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, supporter of blacklists, a man who named names during the Red Scare. Van Cleef kept his politics private, but his associations spoke volumes. He worked with blacklisted directors, took roles from producers Wayne publicly condemned. When Wayne was making propaganda films supporting Vietnam, Van Cleef was in Italy making westerns that criticized American imperialism. The spaghetti western movement that saved Van Cleef's career was everything Wayne hated. These films, made by Italian communists and socialists, portrayed the American West as corrupt, violent without purpose, greed without glory. Wayne called them perverted. He said they were destroying the American image. In 1967, Wayne gave an interview to Playboy. He didn't mention Van Cleef by name, but the target was clear. He condemned actors who sold out to foreign productions, men who prostituted themselves for Italian money. men who helped create what Wayne called anti-American propaganda. Van Cleef was in Rome when that interview published, making $25,000 per film. The most money he'd ever seen. He'd gone from painting houses to top billing, from $350 weekly to international stardom, all because he'd done what Wayne considered treason. He'd left Hollywood's controlled system. Wayne's influence reached across the Atlantic. American distributors who relied on Wayne's films hesitated to pick up spaghetti westerns. Theater chains that showed Wayne's movies got pressure to skip the Italian imports. The word was subtle but clear. Choose side. Sergio Leone changed everything. Sergio Leone saw something in Lee Van Cleef that Hollywood refused to see. In 1965, Leone was casting for a few dollars more. He needed someone to match Clint Eastwood. Someone with presence, someone whose face told stories without words. Leone watched Van Cleef in an old episode of Gunsmoke, 30 seconds of screen time. Van Cleef played a doomed outlaw. But in those 30 seconds, Leone saw what Wayne's Hollywood had missed. He saw nobility in those harsh features, dignity in that lean frame, character in those hooded eyes. The specific scene that caught Leone's attention is worth examining. Van Cleef's character enters a saloon. He knows he's going to die. The marshal is waiting. But Van Cleef doesn't play fear, doesn't play rage. He plays exhaustion, a man tired of running. In American westerns, villains died, snarling or begging. Van Cleef's character just looked relieved. Leone watched that scene 50 times. Frame by frame, he saw an entire film in those 30 seconds. The telegram to Van Cleef was brief. Come to Rome, immediately, expenses paid. Van Cleef thought it was a joke. He was installing insulation in someone's attic when his wife brought him the message. He'd been out of serious work for 2 years. His hands were cut from fiberglass. His back ached from crawling through confined spaces. He was 41 years old. Doing work meant for younger men who hadn't spent 20 years learning a craft that no longer wanted them. Van Cleef almost didn't go. The plane ticket would max out their last credit card. If this was a scam, they'd have nothing left. His wife, Joan, made the decision. She pawned her wedding ring. The original one, not the replacement Van Cleef bought when times were good. That had already been sold. She handed him the cash and said, "If you don't go, we'll always wonder." Leone didn't want Van Cleef to play another villain. He wanted him as the co-lead, equal billing with Eastwood, the same Eastwood who'd been fired from a bit part in a Wayne film just years earlier. 2 rejects from Wayne's Hollywood about to reinvent the Western. The role was Colonel Mortimer, a bounty hunter with principles. Complex, intelligent, deadly, but honorable. Everything Wayne said a Western hero couldn't be. Mortimer dressed in black. He killed for money. He operated outside the law. Yet audiences loved him. For a few dollars more, made more money in Europe than any Wayne film had in 5 years. Van Cleef became an instant star. Not in America, not yet, but in Italy, Spain, Germany, France. Places where Wayne's simple morality didn't sell anymore. Leone later said something revealing. He chose Van Cleef precisely because Hollywood had rejected him. Those weathered features that American producers called too menacing looked authentic to European eyes. Real cowboys, Leone believed, wouldn't look like John Wayne. They'd look like Lee Van Cleef. The money trail. The economics were devastating to Wayne's ego. By 1968, spaghetti westerns were outperforming traditional westerns worldwide. Van Cleef's films made for under $500,000 earned millions. Wayne's bloated productions, costing 10 times more, struggled to break even. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly earned $25 million worldwide. Wayne's The War Wagon, released the same year, made $6 million. Van Cleef was suddenly bankable in markets Wayne couldn't touch. Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, places where Wayne's American exceptionalism didn't translate. Van Cleef's salary progression tells the story. 1964, painting houses for $3 per hour. 1965, $25,000 for a few dollars more. 1966, $50,000 for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 1967, $100,000 for Death Rides a Horse. By 1968, he was making $250,000 per film. Still less than Wayne's $750,000, but Van Cleef was making 4 films per year to Wayne's one. The Italian producers had a different model. Fast, cheap, profitable, no union restrictions, no studio oversight, no moral guidelines. They shot in Spain, where labor was cheap. They dubbed everything, so language didn't matter. They sold globally while Wayne sold to America. Van Cleef learned Italian. He embraced the culture. He bought a house in Rome. He wasn't just taking Italian money. He was becoming European. This while Wayne was wrapping himself tighter in the American flag, making films that increasingly felt like museum pieces. American studios noticed. They started offering Van Cleef Hollywood roles again, but now he could refuse them. He did, repeatedly. He turned down parts that would have had him playing subordinate to established stars, parts that looked suspiciously like the thankless villain roles he'd done for 15 years. The face-to-face. They crossed paths exactly 3 times after Van Cleef's European success. Each encounter was documented by witnesses. Each was tense. Each revealed more about why these men couldn't coexist in the same industry. The first was at the 1969 Golden Globes. Van Cleef had returned to Los Angeles for business. Wayne was presenting. Backstage, they stood 5 feet apart. Wayne looked through Van Cleef like he was furniture. Van Cleef stared back. Neither spoke. A photographer asked them to pose together. Wayne walked away. Van Cleef smiled. The second was on the Paramount lot in 1971. Van Cleef was discussing an American project. Wayne was filming. They met in the commissary. Wayne was holding court at his regular table. Van Cleef entered. The room went quiet. Wayne said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I guess they'll let anyone in here now." Van Cleef got his coffee and left. The third and final meeting was at a Producers Guild event in 1973. Van Cleef was back in Hollywood, his European career winding down. Wayne was drunk. Witnesses say very drunk. He approached Van Cleef near the bar. "You're the one who sold out," Wayne said. Van Cleef's response was quiet, but a waiter heard it. "I'm the one who survived without kissing your ass." Wayne swung. He was 66 years old and drunk, but he swung. Van Cleef stepped aside. Wayne missed and stumbled. Security intervened. The incident was hushed up. No police report. No press coverage, but everyone there saw it. The king of cowboys throwing a punch at the man who'd escaped his kingdom. What Wayne never knew. Here's what burned Van Cleef most. Wayne never knew the details. Never knew that Van Cleef's daughter was disabled. Never knew the medical bills that drove him to paint houses. Never knew that Van Cleef tried to get union help during his lean years and was told he hadn't earned enough credits. Wayne never knew that Van Cleef was turned down for a loan from the Motion Picture Relief Fund in 1963, the same fund Wayne served on the board of. The rejection letter cited insufficient industry standing. 15 years of work wasn't enough standing. Wayne never knew that Van Cleef's wife nearly left him in 1964. The financial pressure was destroying their marriage. She worked 2 jobs while he chased parts that didn't exist, parts that Wayne's Hollywood wouldn't give him. Van Cleef never talked about this publicly. Even in later interviews, when he could have destroyed Wayne's image, he kept quiet about the personal costs. He'd mentioned the rejection, the typecasting, the struggle, but never the daughter's therapy bills, never the nights without electricity, never the repo notices. Wayne lived in a bubble of success. His struggles ended in the 1940s. By the time Van Cleef was trying to break through, Wayne had forgotten what failure felt like. He saw Van Cleef's move to Europe as betrayal. He couldn't see it as survival. The class divide was real. Wayne came from middle-class Iowa stock. Van Cleef's family were New Jersey farmers. Wayne went to USC on a football scholarship. Van Cleef joined the Navy at 17. Wayne got his breakthrough connections. Van Cleef got his through desperation. The Young Guns' disrespect. even younger actors treated Van Cleef like damaged goods. Robert Redford, riding high after Butch Cassidy, was offered a scene with Van Cleef in a 1970 television movie. Redford's agent called the producers. The message was clear. Redford doesn't work with spaghetti western types. The scene was rewritten. Paul Newman was subtler but equally dismissive. At a Directors Guild screening in 1971, Van Cleef approached Newman about a project. Newman listened politely, then said, "I don't think our styles would mesh." Translation: Van Cleef was beneath him. Newman had never seen a single Van Cleef starring role. Didn't matter. Steve McQueen was the worst of the younger generation. He actively campaigned against Van Cleef getting parts. When Van Cleef was considered for The Magnificent Seven, McQueen told director John Sturges that Van Cleef would bring the wrong energy. He meant European energy, foreign energy. The role went to Robert Vaughn instead. The irony burned. McQueen was doing exactly what Van Cleef had done, playing anti-heroes, complex characters, morally ambiguous men, but McQueen was doing it with Hollywood's blessing and budget. Van Cleef had to cross an ocean to play those same roles. Charles Bronson should have been an ally, another actor with unconventional looks who struggled for years, but when Bronson broke through in the 70s, he distanced himself from Van Cleef. They'd known each other since 1954, shared drinks, shared rejections, but success changed Bronson. He told people he'd earned his stardom the right way, the American way. At a Hollywood party in 1975, Van Cleef confronted Bronson. Witnesses say Van Cleef asked, "What's the right way, Charlie? Kissing ass for 20 years?" Bronson walked away. They never spoke again. The Final Insult. Wayne's last Western was The Shootist in 1976. He played a dying gunfighter. Critics called it his finest performance. The vulnerability he'd avoided for 40 years finally appeared on screen. He was dying in real life, too. Cancer. Van Cleef was offered a role in the film, not a villain this time, a sheriff, a lawman. It would have been a reconciliation of sorts. Van Cleef turned it down. No explanation, just no. The real reason came out years later. The role paid $10,000. Van Cleef was making $300,000 per film in Europe, but it wasn't about money. The producers wanted Van Cleef to thank Wayne publicly for the opportunity, to acknowledge Wayne's greatness, to essentially apologize for choosing Europe over Hollywood. Van Cleef's agent begged him to take it. It would reopen Hollywood doors. It would rehabilitate his American career. It would end the unofficial blacklist that still limited his U.S. opportunities. Van Cleef's response was 2 words: absolutely not. Wayne died in 1979. Van Cleef outlived him by 10 years. In those 10 years, Van Cleef gave exactly 1 interview about Wayne. An Italian journalist asked about their relationship. Van Cleef's answer: John Wayne represented everything I had to escape to survive. He was the lock. I had to find another door. At Wayne's funeral, every major Hollywood figure attended. Van Cleef wasn't invited. He was in Spain filming another Western. When told about Wayne's death, witnesses say Van Cleef nodded and went back to work. The System's Revenge. After Wayne died, something interesting happened, or didn't happen. Van Cleef's American career never recovered. The blacklist, Wayne never officially declared, somehow continued. Van Cleef couldn't get major U.S. theatrical releases. His films went straight to drive-ins or television. The Hollywood establishment closed ranks. Directors who'd worked with Wayne wouldn't hire Van Cleef. Studios that had produced Wayne's films ignored Van Cleef's agents. The message was never explicit. It didn't have to be. Van Cleef made his living doing television. The Master with Timothy Van Patten. Guest spots on The A-Team. He was 60 years old, taking whatever paid. The man who'd been Europe's biggest Western star was doing episodes of Airwolf. But here's the detail that matters. Van Cleef never complained publicly, never wrote a tell-all book, never sold his story to tabloids. He could have made money trashing Wayne's memory, He didn't. Instead, he kept working, B-movies, television, voice work, whatever paid bills. He bought a modest house in Oxnard, California. No mansion, no Hollywood Hills estate. Just a regular house in a working-class neighborhood. When young actors asked about his career, Van Cleef told them about Europe, about Leone, about breaking free from Hollywood's boxes. He never mentioned Wayne by name. But the lesson was clear. Sometimes you have to leave to succeed. Van Cleef died in 1989. Heart attack. He was still working, scheduled to film another low-budget Western. His funeral was small, family and a few actor friends. No Hollywood establishment, no studio executives, no Academy tribute. What the papers missed. The obituaries got it wrong. They called Van Cleef a character actor who found fame in spaghetti westerns. They mentioned his work with Leone. They noted his villain roles. They missed the real story. Van Cleef wasn't just another actor who went to Europe. He was proof that Wayne's Hollywood was a lie, that the meritocracy was actually an aristocracy. That talent meant less than fitting the mold. The European directors who worked with Van Cleef told different stories. They talked about his professionalism, his willingness to do his own stunts at 50, his ability to convey volumes with just his eyes, things Hollywood never let him show. Leone's assistant director on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly said something revealing. Van Cleef never mentioned Wayne on set. But whenever they filmed scenes where Van Cleef's character faced off against authority, something changed in his eyes, a real anger. Decades of rejection focused into a look. Van Cleef's daughter gave one interview after his death. She said her father kept a photo in his wallet, not a family photo, not a publicity still. It was a picture from For a Few Dollars More, his first starring role, his escape from Wayne's Hollywood. She said he looked at it every day. The final irony came in 2003. The American Film Institute listed its top 50 heroes and villains. Wayne was number 13 on the heroes list. Van Cleef didn't make either list. Even in death, he remained outside their system. But in Rome, there's a bar near Cinecittà Studios. Van Cleef's picture hangs on the wall, not Wayne's Van Cleef's. The bartender, whose father worked on spaghetti westerns, says American tourists sometimes ask who at Island. He tells them, the man who showed us John Wayne was just an actor. This man was real. You don't go from the top of Netflix to being completely erased without a story. And in Kevin Spacey's case, it's not one story. It's dozens. This isn't gossip. This is documented. And it destroyed everything. Oscar era solidifies stardom. In 1995, Kevin Spacey won his first Academy Award. It was for The Usual Suspects. He played Roger Verbal Kint, a quiet man with a limp and a stutter. His performance blew people away. Critics called it genius. The twist at the end became one of the most talked about in movie history. Spacey walked off with the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Just 4 years later, he won again. This time, it was for American Beauty. He played Lester Burnham, a middle-aged dad losing his grip. The film was dark, weird, and bold. It made over $350 million worldwide and swept the Oscars. Spacey got Best Actor. That cemented him as one of the top actors in the world. By 2000, everyone in Hollywood wanted to work with him. He was in L.A. Confidential, Say 7N, and Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. All hits. Casting him meant awards, buzz, and box office. He didn't just act, he got more control. He picked scripts, produced movies, and shaped his roles. His name on a project gave it weight. People called him a thinking man's actor, but he knew how to pull big numbers, too. Off-screen, he was harder to pin down. He rarely gave interviews. When he did, he kept things vague. Reporters asked about his private life. He dodged those questions. That only added to the mystery. In 1999, he was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He thanked the industry, but joked that he'd never planned to become famous. To many, it looked like he could do no wrong. 2 Oscars, stage cred, blockbusters, art films. He was on top. Nobody saw what was coming next. This was the golden phase. His talent was never in question, and for a while, neither was his place in the industry. That wouldn't last, but in the late 92nd, Kevin Spacey was untouchable. Production and stage control. In 2003, Kevin Spacey made a move that surprised Hollywood. He left Los Angeles and took a job running a British theater, the Old Vic. It's one of the oldest and most respected theaters in London. Spacey was named artistic director. It wasn't just a side project. He committed to living in the UK and running the place full-time. He said he wanted to give back to the stage, but it also gave him something else: control. He picked the plays, cast the actors, and often starred in the shows himself. The Old Vic needed help. Ticket sales were low. The building needed work. Spacey promised to revive it, and at first, he did. He raised money, drew attention, and brought big names to the stage. He starred in the Philadelphia Story, Richard II, and national anthems. The press gave mixed reviews, but crowds came. At the same time, he kept one foot in Hollywood. He produced and starred in Beyond the Sea, a movie about singer Bobby Darin. Spacey directed it too. He also sang every song. It was a passion project. He spent years preparing. He even learned to perform live with a full band. The film got mixed reviews, but critics praised his dedication. It was clear he didn't just want roles. He wanted control over every part of the process. Behind the scenes, Spacey was becoming known as intense and demanding. Some actors loved working with him. Others didn't. Stories began to circulate about how he ran rehearsals, how he spoke to staff, and how private he was with his personal life. Early rumors, tight silence. In 2004, headlines popped up after a strange incident in London. Spacey said he was mugged in a park at 4 a.m. The story sounded off. Later, he told the press he had been trying to help a lost dog, but it turned out someone had tried to scam him. Police confirmed no major crime had happened. Still, it fueled questions about what he was doing there alone at that hour. People didn't forget the story. It floated around blogs and gossip sites. They hinted at something hidden, but nothing stuck, and Spacey kept his silence. During this time, Spacey was busy rebuilding the Old Vic and starring in stage roles. He kept a packed schedule and avoided the press. When asked about his personal life, he brushed it off. "I live my life, you live yours," he once told a reporter. Around him, things stayed quiet, but in private circles, whispers started picking up. Crew members, young actors, and some theater staff spoke off the record. No names, no lawsuits. Just talk. Most stories didn't make it past forums or blind items. In 2010, a now-deleted blog post by a young actor described a well-known star making aggressive moves during rehearsals. The post didn't name anyone, but readers speculated. Spacey's name came up. Again, there was no confirmation. He kept booking work. He voiced Gertie in Moon, played Lex Luthor in Superman Returns, and led Casino Jack in 2010. In 2011, Margin Call got an Oscar nomination. He worked constantly, never slipping from view. To the public, he was just private. In the industry, some had questions, but no one wanted to be first. In 2013, all of that would change, but in these years, from the outside, Spacey still looked focused, professional, and polished. Rumors didn't slow him down. His name still sold tickets. He had power, awards, and a solid wall around his private life. And for a while, that wall held. House of Cards brings him back. In 2013, Kevin Spacey made a comeback, this time on streaming. He starred in House of Cards, one of Netflix's first original series. He played Frank Underwood, a cold and ruthless politician. People loved it. Critics praised the writing, the pacing, and especially Spacey's performance. He wasn't just the lead actor, he was also an executive producer that gave him serious control behind the scenes. The show was dark, smart, and addictive. It helped launch Netflix into the streaming spotlight. Spacey won a Golden Globe in 2015 for the role. He also picked up 2 SAG Awards. The show earned dozens of nominations. For a while, it was Netflix's biggest hit. Viewers binge-watched entire seasons. It wasn't just about awards. The role gave him new relevance. After years in theater and low-profile films, he was back on top. Streaming was the future, and he was one of its first major stars. He leaned into the spotlight again. He hosted the 2017 Tony Awards. He did impressions, cracked jokes, and showed off his stage roots. He also stayed involved at the Old Vic, commuting between London and Hollywood. Frank Underwood became a cultural icon. Spacey's delivery, calm, smug, direct to the camera, was copied, parodied, and quoted. Even people who didn't follow politics knew the character. Behind the scenes, he kept working with the same tight circle. He rarely gave interviews. When he did, they were polished. He avoided personal topics, just like before. To Netflix, he was a brand. To fans, he was back. He seemed in full control of the role, the show, and his image. This was a new era for Spacey. Different format, same power. He'd gone from Oscar winner to theater boss to streaming star, all without ever answering the questions people still had. But while House of Cards was making headlines, other stories were finally gaining traction. People who had stayed silent were now paying attention to the shift in the industry. It hadn't caught up to him yet, but it was close, and when it hit, it would hit fast. Anthony Rapp breaks the silence. In October 2017, actor Anthony Rapp came forward. He told BuzzFeed News that Kevin Spacey made a sexual advance toward him in 1986. Rapp was 14 years old at the time. Spacey was 26. Rapp said they met while working on Broadway shows. One night, after a party at Spacey's apartment, he alleged that Spacey picked him up, laid him down on a bed, and climbed on top of him. Rapp said he got up and left quickly. He stayed quiet for years, but after the Harvey Weinstein story broke, Rapp decided to speak. The response came fast. That same day, Spacey posted a message on Twitter. He said he didn't remember the incident. Then he added something else. If I did behave then as he describes, I owe him the sincerest apology. But what happened next made the situation worse. In the same statement, Spacey said he had chosen to live as a gay man. That line caused instant backlash. LGBTQ advocates and the public criticized him for linking coming out to a story about alleged misconduct with a minor. Actor Zachary Quinto tweeted that Spacey had used coming out as a calculated manipulation. The press, social media, and entertainment industry lit up overnight. News outlets began looking into other past behavior. Anonymous stories and on-record claims started to surface. Netflix responded within days. The company announced it would end House of Cards after season 6. Production stopped immediately. A few days later, they said Spacey was no longer part of the show at all. The International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences also withdrew a planned special Emmy Award that had been meant for Spacey that year. The headlines kept coming, but Rapp's story had been the first to open the door. Career collapses overnight. Within days of Rapp's story, more people came forward. A former production assistant on House of Cards said Spacey groped him during a drive. 8 crew members backed the claim, saying the behavior had been going on for years. Actor Harry Dreyfus shared a story about an incident from 2008. Others followed, mostly men, mostly young at the time. The list grew quickly. By the end of November, over 20 people had made public or anonymous claims. Netflix cut all ties. Season 6 of House of Cards was rewritten without Spacey. His scenes were gone. Robin Wright took the lead role. Then came the movie Fallout. Spacey had already filmed All the Money in the World, playing oil tycoon J. Paul Getty. The studio made a rare move. They recast the role. Director Ridley Scott brought in Christopher Plummer, reshot every scene, and released the film on time. It cost millions, but it worked. Plummer was nominated for an Oscar. Spacey's version was never shown. His agents at CAA dropped him. His publicist left. The International Academy pulled the special Emmy he had been set to receive. Other projects vanished. His Gore Vidal biopic for Netflix was canceled before release. Talks of future films stopped cold. In 2018, he starred in Billionaire Boys Club, a film that had been completed before the allegations. It hit theaters in the U.S. with no promotion. Opening weekend earnings? Just $618. That year, Spacey went silent until Christmas Eve. He uploaded a video titled "Let Me Be Frank." In it, he spoke directly to the camera in character as Frank Underwood. He said, "You want me back." The video was bizarre. Critics called it creepy and tone-deaf. Some thought it was a legal strategy. Others just didn't get it. It didn't stop the fallout. His charity, the Kevin Spacey Foundation, shut down. The Old Vic launched an investigation. They said they received 20 allegations of inappropriate behavior going back years. In less than 12 months, Spacey went from starring in one of TV's biggest shows to having no active projects at all. The drop wasn't slow. It was instant. Legal trouble in the U.S. Kevin Spacey faced his first criminal charge in 2018. It came from an alleged incident at a bar in Nantucket, Massachusetts. A young man, 18 at the time, said Spacey bought him drinks, then groped him. The case made headlines fast. The accuser was the son of a Boston news anchor. Police said they had video evidence from the bar's security system. Spacey was charged with indecent assault and battery. In January 2019, he appeared in court. He wore a suit and said nothing. His lawyers entered a not guilty plea. The trial was set to begin that summer. But the case began to fall apart. The accuser said he lost his phone, the same phone that had the original text and videos. The judge ordered him to hand it over. Then he stopped cooperating. In July 2019, the charges were dropped. Prosecutors said they couldn't move forward without key evidence. Spacey didn't comment publicly. Meanwhile, civil lawsuits were also piling up. One anonymous accuser filed a case in California but passed away before it moved forward. Another man, a massage therapist, filed in 2019. He died before the case reached trial, and it was later dismissed. Despite the legal victories, the damage was done. Public opinion hadn't shifted. Studios stayed away. That same year, Spacey released another strange video. Again, he was in character as Frank Underwood. Again, it came out on Christmas Eve. He said, "You didn't really think I'd miss the opportunity to wish you a Merry Christmas, did you?" The pattern was odd. He spoke as if fans missed him, but there were no roles, no press tours, no return. In total, by the end of 2019, more than 30 men had accused Spacey of misconduct. No criminal convictions had stuck. But the stories kept his name in the news, and not in a good way. The trials may have stalled, but the public fallout didn't. He wasn't in court anymore. He wasn't on screen either. He had become a Hollywood ghost, visible only through headlines and court updates. UK charges and acquittal. In May 2022, Kevin Spacey was charged in the United Kingdom. 4 men accused him of sexual offenses that took place between 2001 and 2013. These weren't rumors or civil suits. These were criminal charges filed by the Crown Prosecution Service. The charges included 12 counts, including unwanted touching and engaging someone in intimate acts without their consent. The alleged incidents happened while Spacey was living in London and working at the Old Vic Theatre. In July 2022, Spacey flew to London and appeared in court. He pleaded not guilty to every charge. The trial was set for summer 2023. The case moved fast. During the trial, the 4 men testified about what they claimed Spacey had done. Their stories included unwanted touching, aggressive behavior, and situations where they said they felt cornered. Spacey's defense pushed back. His lawyer argued that all the interactions were either exaggerated or consensual. Some of the alleged events dated back over 20 years. Others had no physical evidence. The trial lasted 4 weeks. In total, 12 jurors heard every claim in defense. On the 26th of July, 2023, the jury delivered its verdict: not guilty on all counts. Spacey gave a short speech outside the courthouse. He said he was humbled and grateful to the jury for their careful decision. He didn't answer questions. The reaction was mixed. Some called it a legal win. Others said the outcome didn't erase the stories already out there. That same year, more attention landed on a British documentary called Spacey Unmasked. It was already in production. The producers said they'd interviewed new people who had never spoken publicly before. Even with the UK case closed, the spotlight stayed on him. The court had cleared him, but the public wasn't sure what to make of it. No studios called, no shows were offered, there were no big comebacks, just a courtroom win and silence after. For Spacey, it was a relief, but it didn't change his standing. In legal terms, he was free. In Hollywood, nothing had moved. Comeback attempts fall flat. After the trial, Kevin Spacey tried to rebuild. He took roles in small films, mostly low-budget or foreign projects. These weren't studio releases. They were independent films shot overseas with quiet backing. In 2022, he filmed The Man Who Drew God, an Italian drama directed by Franco Nero. It was his first acting role since The Scandal. He played a police detective. The film caused an uproar. Critics called it tone-deaf. Even Vanessa Redgrave, originally set to appear, dropped out before filming. Next came Control, a British thriller where Spacey voiced a mysterious caller. He wasn't on screen, just heard. That didn't help. The release barely made a dent. He also popped up at film festivals. In 2023, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award at a private event during the National Museum of Cinema's festival in Turin, Italy. It wasn't publicized widely. Protesters showed up anyway. In interviews, he insisted he still had fans. He said, "I know there are people ready to hire me. The moment I am cleared of all this, they will." But no major studio ever stepped forward. Directors avoided his name. Big actors said nothing. In 2024, Spacey did a podcast appearance. He spoke carefully, saying he had learned from everything but didn't admit to wrongdoing. He said he hoped for forgiveness, but didn't ask for it directly. The media barely covered it. The industry didn't react. His attempts to return to the public eye felt muted. He had no agent, no publicist, no distribution deal. Projects came from filmmakers trying to make headlines by using his name, not because they believed in his return. A few fans still supported him online, but even that base had shrunk. Most of the buzz now came from people debating whether he should be allowed back at all. The roles kept getting smaller, the releases quieter. His name, once a draw, now came with baggage no one wanted to carry. The work was there, but it wasn't a comeback. It was survival, quiet parts in forgotten films, and that was the best he could get. New claims and rock bottom. In May 2024, the documentary Spacey Unmasked aired in the UK. It was a two-part special on Channel 4. The series featured new interviews with 10 men. They said Spacey had made unwanted advances or touched them inappropriately. Most of these claims were never part of any court case. Some were from decades ago. The men told their stories on camera, some for the first time. One was a minor at the time of the alleged incident. Spacey denied every new accusation. In a public statement, he called the documentary a one-sided hit job. He said the producers had ignored facts that would clear him. But the damage had already been done. Headlines spread fast. Even though no charges were filed, the public response was harsh. Online, people called out the networks that had supported him in the past. In February 2025, one of the men from Spacey Unmasked filed a civil lawsuit in London. It's the first new legal action since his acquittal. The case is ongoing. There was also renewed attention on his past ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Spacey's name was found in Epstein's flight logs. He responded by asking the court to release all related documents. He said he wanted the full truth out in the open. At this point, he had no projects in the works, no agent, no PR team. Even indie filmmakers stopped reaching out. Rumors swirled that he sold property in the U.S. and moved to Europe full-time. His last public sighting was at a quiet event in Rome. He posed for photos but gave no interviews. His name is still recognized, but not for the roles, not for the awards, not anymore. This is where it's landed, quiet, empty, and far from where it started. Kevin Spacey has officially hit rock bottom.
They made us laugh. They made us cry. They made us believe in their on-screen personas. But when the cameras stopped rolling, their true nature came out, and it's nothing like what you expected. The Family Man's Dark Side. For years, Bill Cosby was America's favorite TV dad. On The Cosby Show, he played the perfect father, funny, wise, and full of life lessons. Off-screen, he gave speeches about family values and personal responsibility. But behind the friendly image, there was a much darker truth. For decades, rumors followed him, but few questioned his reputation. That changed in 2014 when comedian Hannibal Buress called him out during a stand-up show. The clip went viral, and suddenly, the world started listening. One by one, women came forward, sharing nearly identical stories. More than 60 women accused Cosby of drugging and assaulting them. Many had been too scared to speak out earlier. He was rich, powerful, and had a spotless public image, but the details were disturbing. Aspiring actresses, models, and even colleagues said he lured them in with promises of mentorship, only to betray them. In 2015, Cosby was arrested for assaulting Andrea Constand, a former Temple University employee. The case went to trial, and in 2018, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, becoming the first major celebrity of the Me Too era to be convicted. But in 2021, his conviction was overturned due to a legal technicality. A past deal with a prosecutor should have prevented the trial from happening. Just like that, Cosby walked free. Even though he was legally released, his career was finished. TV networks pulled The Cosby Show, schools took back honorary degrees, and fans turned away. The man who once lectured others about morality had been exposed as a predator. He still denies the accusations, but his reputation is beyond repair. The talk show tyrant. For years, Ellen DeGeneres was the face of kindness. Her talk show made millions smile with heartwarming surprises, funny celebrity interviews, and feel-good moments. She ended every episode with the words, "Be kind to one another." But behind the scenes, former staff said kindness was the last thing they experienced. In 2020, reports surfaced that working on The Ellen DeGeneres Show was a nightmare. Employees described a toxic workplace filled with fear, intimidation, and unfair treatment. Some were fired after taking medical leave or attending family funerals. Others were told not to look Ellen in the eye. There were even accusations of harassment by top producers, which led to multiple firings. At first, Ellen brushed off the backlash, claiming she had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. But more and more people spoke out. Former guests revealed cold, awkward interactions that clashed with Ellen's on-screen warmth. Celebrities like Dakota Johnson, Mariah Carey, and Brad Garrett hinted that Ellen's friendly TV persona was just an act. The damage was done. Ratings dropped fast, and advertisers started pulling away. In 2021, Ellen announced that her show would end after 19 seasons. She called it a personal decision, but many saw it as a direct result of the backlash. The comedian who was cruel. Chevy Chase was one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1970s and 80s. As an original Saturday Night Live cast member, he helped shape modern sketch comedy. His success led to major film roles in Caddyshack, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Fletch. On-screen, he played lovable, sarcastic wisecrackers. Off-screen, a different story. From the start of his career, Chase gained a reputation for being difficult. He left SNL after just one season, later returning to host and immediately clashing with the new cast. He insulted everyone, including then-rising star Bill Murray. Their feud got so bad that it turned into a physical fight backstage right before a live episode. His arrogance and mean-spirited humor weren't just aimed at co-stars. Writers, directors, and crew members often found him unbearable. Many claimed he was cruel for no reason, making racist, sexist, and demeaning jokes at others' expense. Will Ferrell once called him the worst SNL host he'd ever worked with. Chase's behavior followed him to film sets. During National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, his co-star Beverly D'Angelo said the entire cast had to adjust to his moods, never knowing if he'd be friendly or hostile that day. On the show Community, his treatment of colleagues reached a breaking point. He frequently insulted cast and crew, directing discriminatory comments toward Donald Glover. Show creator Dan Harmon openly criticized him, and Chase eventually left before the final season. Despite his legacy in comedy, Chase's reputation damaged his career. Once a top box office draw, he became increasingly difficult to work with. By the 2000s, leading roles dried up, and he was mostly remembered for his past work and his bad attitude. In interviews, Chase has admitted to being difficult, but often brushes it off as part of his personality. While some still see him as a comedy icon, others view him as an example of how ego and cruelty can overshadow talent. The philanthropist who lied. Jared Leto built a career on transformation. He's an Oscar-winning actor, a rock star with 30 Seconds to Mars, and a self-proclaimed deep thinker. His fans admire his dedication to roles, extreme method acting, and supposed generosity. But behind the carefully crafted image, Leto has faced serious allegations, ranging from cult-like behavior to inappropriate relationships with young fans. For years, stories circulated about his treatment of followers. His band, 30 Seconds to Mars, developed an intense fan base with Leto at the center. He launched a so-called exclusive retreat called Camp Mars, where fans paid thousands to attend. The event was marketed as a bonding experience, but many saw it as a money grab. Photos surfaced of Leto in white robes, surrounded by adoring fans, fueling comparisons to a cult. Then came the more troubling accusations. Multiple sources, including music journalists and social media users, have claimed Leto pursued teenage fans. Reports date back to the early 2000s, when he allegedly used his fame to lure underage girls into uncomfortable situations. A former music industry insider once said Leto had a reputation for targeting girls as young as 16. Though no formal charges have been filed, the whispers never stopped. Leto's behavior on film sets hasn't helped his case. He's known for extreme method acting, but some call it outright harassment. On the set of Suicide Squad, where he played the Joker, he allegedly sent disturbing gifts to co-stars, including used condoms and dead animals. Many dismissed it as a publicity stunt, but others saw it as unprofessional and unsettling. Despite the controversy, Hollywood continues to embrace him. He's still landing major roles and fronting luxury ad campaigns. When asked about the allegations, Leto stays silent or deflects. His fan base remains loyal, and his reputation, while damaged, hasn't fully crumbled. The romantic lead's abuse. Johnny Depp was once one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. With his roles in Edward Scissorhands, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he built a reputation as the eccentric yet charming leading man. Fans saw him as misunderstood, artistic, and deeply romantic, but his off-screen relationships told a different story. In 2016, his ex-wife, actress Amber Heard, filed for divorce and accused him of domestic violence. She provided photos of bruises and claimed he had a history of alcohol-fueled rage. Depp denied everything, calling her a liar and an abuser herself. What followed was one of the most public and bitter celebrity legal battles in history. Heard wrote a 2018 op-ed describing herself as a survivor of domestic abuse without naming Depp. He responded by suing her for defamation, claiming she ruined his career. During the trial, shocking details emerged: drug binges, explosive fights, and violent texts where Depp described wanting to harm Heard. However, recordings also revealed Heard admitting to hitting Depp. The case divided the public. Some believed Heard, pointing to photos, testimonies, and court filings. Others sided with Depp, arguing Heard manipulated him and the media. In 2020, Depp lost a lawsuit against a British newspaper that called him a wife-beater, with the judge ruling the allegations were substantially true. Then came the 2022 U.S. trial, broadcast live to millions. This time, Depp won, with the jury ruling that Heard had defamed him, but the trial was less about proving innocence and more about public perception. Depp's fan base rallied behind him, while Heard's reputation collapsed. Despite the legal win, Depp's career took a hit. He lost his Pirates of the Caribbean role and struggled to rebuild his image. While some studios distanced themselves, others welcomed him back, including European filmmakers.
the action star's fury. Steven Seagal built his career playing tough, unstoppable heroes. In the 80s and 90s, he was one of Hollywood's biggest action stars, leading films like Under Siege and Above the Law. On screen, he took down villains with ease. Off-screen, though, he had a reputation for being difficult, aggressive, and even dangerous. From the start, Seagal's behavior raised eyebrows. He often bragged about his martial arts skills, but many questioned his legitimacy. Co-stars and stunt performers accused him of intentionally hitting them during fight scenes, refusing to pull punches. Actor John Leguizamo recalled Seagal slamming him against a wall for laughing at him on set. His temper wasn't limited to film sets. Over the years, multiple women, including actresses and assistants, accused Seagal of misconduct. Some claimed he made inappropriate advances during auditions, often under the guise of private casting sessions. In 2018, 2 women accused him of assault, including one who said he attacked her when she was just 17. Seagal denied all allegations. His reputation for arrogance and hostility extended beyond Hollywood. Seagal frequently reinvented himself, at one point claiming he worked for the CIA. Later, he cozied up to world leaders, including Vladimir Putin, who granted him Russian citizenship. His growing political ties and controversial statements made him even more polarizing. By the early 2000s, Seagal's Hollywood career was fading. Directors avoided working with him due to his behavior, and he was relegated to low-budget, direct-to-video action films. Even then, reports of mistreatment and erratic behavior continued. Today, Seagal is more known for controversy than for movies. He still insists he's a martial arts master, a law enforcement expert, and a geopolitical strategist. But few take him seriously. Once a major star, his reputation for rage, dishonesty, and misconduct left his career in ruins. The singer who silenced victims. R. Kelly was a music icon. With hits like I Believe I Can Fly and Ignition, Remix, he dominated the R&B charts for decades. Fans saw him as a musical genius, a man who could turn emotions into timeless songs. But behind the fame, troubling accusations followed him for years, ones that were ignored or brushed aside until the truth became too big to hide. Whispers about Kelly's behavior started early in his career. In 1994, at 27, he secretly married 15-year-old Aaliyah using false documents. The marriage was annulled, but it raised serious questions. Then came the early 2000s when disturbing footage surfaced, allegedly showing Kelly involved in misconduct with a minor. He was charged, but avoided conviction in 2008 after the key witness refused to testify. Despite ongoing concerns, Kelly's career thrived. He continued performing to sold-out crowds, winning awards, and working with major artists. Many in the industry turned a blind eye, and those who spoke out were dismissed. For years, he used his wealth and influence to keep accusations quiet. Then, in 2019, Surviving R. Kelly aired. The documentary featured first-hand accounts from multiple women who described years of manipulation and control. The stories painted a disturbing pattern. Kelly allegedly isolated young women, cut them off from their families, and maintained an environment where he controlled every aspect of their lives. The backlash was immediate. His record label dropped him, streaming services pulled his music, and his career collapsed overnight. That same year, Kelly was arrested and charged with serious crimes, including exploitation, coercion, and racketeering. In 2021, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. More convictions followed, sealing his fate. The activist's hidden hypocrisy. Sean Penn built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most intense actors. With 2 Academy Awards and standout performances in Mystic River and Milk, he was celebrated for his raw, emotional performances. Off-screen, he positioned himself as a champion of justice, advocating for disaster relief, human rights, and political reform.
But while he spoke passionately about these causes, his personal history painted a far more complicated picture. Penn's reputation for fiery behavior dates back to the 1980s, during his marriage to Madonna. Their relationship was highly publicized, but behind the scenes, it was anything but picture perfect. In 1988, Madonna reportedly sought police assistance after an alleged violent incident. Though she later downplayed parts of the story, reports of Penn's temper followed him for years. His outbursts weren't limited to his personal life. Throughout his career, Penn frequently made headlines for aggressive run-ins with the media. He was known for clashing with paparazzi, sometimes physically, and even served time in 1987 for an altercation with a photographer. In another instance, he was caught on camera aggressively confronting a reporter, showing the same volatility he often criticized in others. Despite his activism, Penn's actions often contradicted his public stance. He supported humanitarian causes but had a history of heated confrontations with colleagues and journalists. His interviews were filled with harsh criticisms of Hollywood, politics, and even his peers, often sounding less like a voice for justice and more like someone settling personal scores. In later years, Penn's unpredictable behavior made him a controversial figure. While some admired his work in disaster relief, others questioned his motivations, seeing him as someone who inserted himself into global crises for attention. His political views also sparked backlash, with some calling him hypocritical for supporting leaders with questionable records. The fan favorite's manipulation. James Corden built a career on charm. As the host of The Late Late Show, he became a fan favorite with viral segments like Carpool Karaoke and Spill Your Guts or Fill Your Guts. His cheerful personality and self-deprecating humor made him seem relatable, an everyman who just happened to be famous. But behind the smiles and sing-alongs, former colleagues, restaurant staff, and even fans told a very different story. Rumors of Corden's behavior started surfacing years ago, mostly from people who worked behind the scenes. Writers from The Late Late Show claimed he was dismissive and belittling, taking credit for their work and creating a stressful environment. Despite his fun-loving on-screen presence, many described him as cold and uninterested when the cameras weren't rolling. The biggest hit to his reputation came in 2022 when a New York restaurant owner called him out for his treatment of staff. Corden was accused of being rude to servers, yelling over minor mistakes, and even demanding free drinks as compensation for small inconveniences. The backlash was immediate, forcing him to apologize publicly. But for many, the damage was done, especially as more people came forward with similar stories. Co-stars and industry insiders also had their share of complaints. Actor Patrick Stewart famously called Corden out during an awards event, implying he was arrogant and difficult to work with. Others claimed he often ignored fans in public unless cameras were around, making his friendly persona seem more like an act than reality. In 2023, Corden stepped away from The Late Late Show, insisting it was his decision to spend more time with family. But with his reputation taking multiple hits, some believed he saw the writing on the wall. The awards, darling secret life. Kevin Spacey was once one of Hollywood's most respected actors. With 2 Academy Awards for The Usual Suspects and American Beauty, plus a starring role in House of Cards, he was seen as a powerhouse of talent. His performances were intense, calculated, and unforgettable. But behind the prestige, a darker reality existed, one that would eventually destroy his career. In 2017, at the height of the Me Too movement, actor Anthony Rapp accused Spacey of inappropriate behavior when Rapp was just 14. Spacey responded with a public apology but attempted to shift the focus by making a statement about his personal life. The damage was immediate. His response was widely criticized as deflecting from the real issue. After Rapp's accusations, more people spoke out. Multiple individuals, including crew members from House of Cards, accused Spacey of misconduct and abuse of power. The accusations painted him as someone who used his influence to intimidate and manipulate others. The fallout was swift. Netflix dropped him from House of Cards, removing his character from the final season. Studios distanced themselves, and Spacey's planned projects were either shelved or recast. Ridley Scott even replaced him in All the Money in the World, reshooting Spacey's scenes with Christopher Plummer just weeks before the film's release. Spacey faced multiple legal battles in the years that followed. While he won some cases, including a 2022 civil trial against Rapp, other accusations led to criminal investigations. Though some charges were dropped, his once thriving career was over. By 2023, Spacey was attempting a slow return, claiming he had been unfairly canceled. But Hollywood hasn't welcomed him back. The actor who once held the industry in his grip is now largely forgotten, his talent overshadowed by the scandals that tore his career apart. The year was 1943. A film sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters. At the center, a woman lying in hay rewriting what was allowed on screen. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner. It was Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The bra that launched a legend. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. It was a low-budget Western by Howard Hughes, starring a newcomer named Jane Russell. But Hughes had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want a movie, he wanted shock value. Russell was only 21, with no major roles behind her. Hughes cast her as Rhea McDonald, a sultry saloon girl. During filming, he became obsessed with how her figure appeared on screen. Costumes didn't give him the look he wanted, so he built his own solution, a new kind of bra. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design meant to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hughes even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Despite that, Hughes told the press she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the haystack photo. A publicity still showed Russell reclining in hay, blouse barely holding on. No moviegoers cared about the plot. They wanted to see that image. Theaters received angry letters. Religious groups protested. One censorship board called the photo morally dangerous. The production code refused to approve the movie. Hughes had a plan. He sent fake protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens. It worked. Curious crowds showed up in droves. The limited release in 1943 was chaos. In New York and Los Angeles, people lined up for blocks. In some cities, police were called to manage traffic. Chicago shut the film down mid-run. Jane Russell had barely opened her mouth on screen, but her image was already burned into American culture. The Outlaw didn't make her a star because of her acting. It made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. The full nationwide release didn't happen until 1946. By then, she didn't need it. She was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood. And she had done it without saying a word. Headlines, contracts, and control. After The Outlaw stirred controversy in 1943, Jane Russell's name never left the papers, but behind the headlines, she was caught in a mess of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control. She hadn't asked for any of it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract. That meant no other studio could touch her, and she couldn't choose her roles. She later said, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted. I couldn't even accept better parts." For years, Hughes refused to loan her out, even when major studios begged. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount all showed interest. Hughes said no. During that time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, public appearances. It was all meant to keep her famous without ever stepping on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Then came the court battles. Film censors still tried to block The Outlaw from playing nationwide. Hughes fought back with everything he had, lawyers, appeals, even threats to pull his other films from theaters. Jane stayed quiet in public but admitted later she hated the circus. "I wanted to act,
not pose for ads. In 1946, the film finally got wide release. It made millions. Critics weren't kind. Most called the acting wooden and the story dull. But it didn't matter. People came to see her. Hughes had turned Jane into a brand, not an actress. Finally, in 1947, Jane got a new project, Young Widow. It was her first non-Hughes production. The script had depth, and she was eager to prove she could act. But the damage had been done. Audiences still saw her as the Hey Girl. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her presence. Others said she was stiff. She later admitted she was still learning. Still, she wasn't going away. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even if no one could agree on why. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen. And Hughes? He still wasn't done pulling the strings. Jane versus Hollywood. By 1948, Jane Russell was trapped between fame and frustration. She was known everywhere, but barely working. Hughes continued to control her roles and turn down outside offers. She started to push back. Hughes offered her a part in The Paleface, a comedy western with Bob Hope. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of a camera. It turned out to be a smart move. The film was a hit. Audiences loved her timing, and critics admitted she held her own next to Hope. It was the first time she got to show range. But things weren't smooth behind the scenes. Jane had no power over her career choices. Hughes micromanaged every decision. He approved costumes, scripts, even haircuts. Jane called him obsessed with control. She began quietly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract. Meanwhile, gossip columns tracked her every move. She was photographed constantly but rarely quoted. Journalists described her as cool, hard to read, and aloof. In truth, she was tired of being treated like a mannequin. Her public image was sex symbol. In private, she was religious, blunt, and preferred quiet. In 1949, she shot The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum. The production was rushed because Mitchum had just been arrested for marijuana possession. The studio needed good press fast. Jane agreed to the project on short notice. It was a basic crime story, but again, she handled it well. Mitchum later said, Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit. But Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she publicly clashed with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. She turned down several scripts and refused to pose for certain publicity shots. That made her difficult in Hollywood terms. Jane wasn't playing along anymore. She wanted to act, not sell, and slowly people were starting to listen. The pinup girl had found her voice, and she was just getting warmed up. Diamonds, blondes, and a stolen show. In 1953, Jane Russell landed what should have been a supporting role. Instead, she nearly stole the film. The movie? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her co-star? Marilyn Monroe. Monroe played the sweet, flirty Lorelei. Jane played Dorothy, the sharp brunette who called the shots. On paper, Marilyn was the lead. But on screen, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner. Her delivery was drier. Her attitude? Unshakable. Most people don't know this. Jane didn't want to do it at first. She thought the musical numbers were silly, but the studio pushed her in, and once filming started, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. Monroe had more screen time, but Jane had more control. Crew members said Russell often calmed Marilyn down between takes. She reportedly helped block scenes and guided Monroe through complex shots. Then came the premiere drama. Here's the rumor. Monroe refused to attend the Blondes premiere in Hollywood, so Jane showed up alone and played both roles on the red carpet. She even signed Monroe's name for fans. Reporters called her a total pro and said she carried the night without breaking a sweat. The movie became a global hit. Jane's performance was praised for being grounded and funny, while Marilyn got the attention for her beauty. But behind the scenes, even executives said Jane held the film together. She never bragged about it. In interviews, she gave Monroe credit and avoided drama. But those who worked on the film knew the truth. Jane was the adult in the room. She showed up on time, knew her lines, and never cracked under pressure. That role cemented her as more than a body or a photo. She could act, she could command, and she could outshine a legend without even trying. Hollywood had underestimated her again, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. The Hollywood Bowl baptism. In 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans again, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. She stepped into the waters of the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands and got baptized. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Jane had always kept her faith private. She was raised in a deeply religious home and read the Bible daily. But the tension between her image and her values was growing. After years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles, she wanted to make a statement. That statement came during a Billy Graham revival event. The massive crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was fully submerged. It made headlines the next morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. After that, she became more vocal about her beliefs. She gave interviews criticizing the moral direction of Hollywood. She said too many films celebrated sin and called some of her past work foolish. She even started a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, combining her faith and advocacy. This turn confused people. She was still doing movies and still dressing glamorously, but now she was talking about Jesus on talk shows. Some fans loved it, others tuned out. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift. She didn't back down. In public speeches, she warned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin. In private, she mentored struggling performers behind the scenes. But not everyone supported her. Some Hollywood insiders mocked her open faith. She was accused of being judgmental and old-fashioned. Producers called her unpredictable. Studios didn't know if she'd promote a film or preach at the premiere. Jane didn't care. She wasn't asking for approval anymore. The woman once labeled too hot for theaters was now talking about redemption and doing it on her own terms. And while the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life. Fight with the church. After several miscarriages, she decided to adopt, but adoption in the 1950s wasn't simple, especially across borders. Her first adopted son, Tommy, came from Ireland. The process took over a year. Jane grew frustrated with red tape and church politics. She believed too many kids were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. In interviews, she called the system heartless and said it cared more about rules than children. So she took matters into her own hands. In one case, she flew overseas, met with the child's caretakers, and returned with the baby before full approval. She claimed it was legal under emergency conditions. Authorities disagreed. The press labeled it baby smuggling. Jane called it saving a life. That incident pushed her to create WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund. It helped connect orphans with families worldwide. Jane used her fame to pressure lawmakers and raise money. She testified in front of Congress and worked with embassies to change regulations. But the backlash was real. Catholic leaders in Ireland accused her of undermining church-run orphanages. One priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane fired back, saying the church cared more about control than compassion. Despite the criticism, she expanded her work. WAIF helped place hundreds of children in homes during its peak. Jane personally reviewed applications and even helped pay travel costs for some families. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was hands-on. This wasn't the Hollywood work people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She said, "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in hay." Her house in California became a hub for her causes. Her kids lived outside the spotlight, and she rarely talked about them publicly. But in her later interviews, she called them her greatest work. The roles in film paid the bills. The work in adoption, she said, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In an era when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane took the opposite path. and she made sure everyone knew it. She called second-wave feminism a mess of angry women yelling about problems they created. In one 1,973 interview, she said, "I don't know what they're fighting for. I never had to fight for anything." That quote alone set off a storm. Talk show hosts loved booking her. She clashed with feminist guests and stood her ground, even when audiences booed. She argued that women already had power but were wasting it on resentment. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect." Her words drew backlash. Gloria Steinem's supporters called her outdated. Some women's groups urged sponsors to drop her from endorsements. But Russell didn't flinch. She said modern feminists misunderstood strength. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are. She also attacked Hollywood for portraying women as helpless victims or hypersexualized cliches. Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did exactly that. Jane didn't deny it, but said the problem wasn't the image. It was the intention behind it. By this time, she was focused on her religious activism and charity work. But her conservative takes made headlines more than her advocacy. She called Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed less therapy and more churches. She wasn't trying to please anyone. The feminist movement saw her as a relic. Her fans saw her as fearless. Either way, she stayed visible. While other actresses her age faded quietly, Jane Russell kept showing up, louder, bolder, and completely unwilling to change. Love her or hate her, she refused to play the part anyone handed her. At 60 and still breaking rules. In the 1980s, most actresses from Jane Russell's era were long retired, not Jane. At 60, she signed a national ad deal to model Playtex bras. The ads ran on television, in magazines, and in stores across America. Most women her age were expected to disappear from the spotlight, but Jane showed up in full glam, pitching support bras to real women. The tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" Jane didn't think so. Critics rolled their eyes. She didn't care. "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born," she joked in an interview. "I know what works." And she meant it. The campaign was a hit. Sales spiked, especially among older women who saw her as relatable, not ridiculous. But this comeback wasn't just about ads. She started making more public appearances again. Church groups, charity galas, even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't fading away either. She found a way to stay in front of the public without pretending to be younger than she was. And she wasn't afraid to call out ageism. When a reporter asked if she'd consider a comeback film, she replied, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life people cared about her comfort more than her figure. Back then, it was all underwire and pain. Now it's all soft cups and scents. Took long enough. The lingerie campaign made headlines, not for shock, but for surprise. No one expected Jane Russell, the once silent symbol of scandal, to become the face of grown-up confidence. She wasn't trying to seduce anymore. She was trying to relate. And that hit harder than any bombshell act ever could. In a business that tossed women aside after 40, Jane Russell didn't just refuse to disappear. She came back in a bra and reminded the world who she was. And she did it with a wink, not an apology. Outspoken, unfiltered, and unbothered. While most Golden Age stars slipped into quiet retirement, Jane cranked up the volume. She gave interviews that often went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. On one local television segment, she called modern movies trash with sound effects. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims instead of women. One host tried to steer her back to polite conversation. Jane doubled down. She also leaned harder into politics. She identified as a proud conservative, supported prayer in schools, and spoke at several Republican events. She criticized Hollywood's moral decay and said most actors today were spoiled and spineless. These statements didn't win her new fans, but they kept her in the press. In 1999, she made headlines again for all the wrong reasons. She was arrested for driving under the influence in California. Her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. At the time, she was in her late 70s. The tabloids pounced. "Busted bombshell," read one headline. She didn't deny it, she didn't spin it, and she definitely didn't apologize in public. Instead, she joked about it later, saying, "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking." Even when called out, she rarely backed down. In one interview, she admitted she didn't believe in political correctness. "I say what I mean, and if you don't like it, turn the channel." No apologies to the end. She passed away in 2011 at the age of 89. True to form, her final years were lived without filters, edits, or apologies. She spent her last decade mostly in Santa Maria, California, staying active in her church and speaking at local events. Neighbors described her as approachable but blunt. If you asked about her past, she'd answer, but she wouldn't sugarcoat it. She didn't do nostalgic interviews. She didn't attend retrospectives. When asked why she skipped award shows or tributes, she said, "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" In her final interviews, she remained firm in her views. She still rejected modern feminism, still criticized Hollywood's direction, and still defended her early work, even the parts people once called scandalous. "I gave the public what they wanted," she said, "and I did it on my own terms." She also spoke about faith until the end. Church was her real stage, and she liked it that way. She called it the only place that never asked me to be something else. When news of her death broke, the headlines were predictable. Most focused on the outlaw, the hay photo, and her body. Few highlighted her decades of charity work, her fights with censors, or the fact that she'd outlasted most of her peers. Her family didn't issue a long statement. They said she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by loved ones. No funeral spectacle, no red carpet send-off. And that felt right, because Jane Russell never needed the spotlight. She was the kind of star who took it, then handed it back when she was done. No legacy spin, no last-minute reinvention, just one final act of doing exactly what she always had. Living loud, aging honestly, and refusing to ever play by someone else's script.
One stare stopped a director cold, one scene made censors panic, and one decision nearly ended her career. Gene Simmons didn't hint. She exposed, "This isn't your grandmother's Hollywood story." War-era debut with big impact. Gene Simmons was just 14 when she stepped onto a movie set for the first time. The film, Give Us the Moon. It was a light comedy, but casting directors noticed something deeper in her. A mix of innocence and edge that didn't feel rehearsed. By 1945, she landed a small role in Caesar and Cleopatra, acting opposite Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains. Jean had no formal training, but her eyes stole every frame. Even with just a few lines, critics pointed her out. One review said she had more presence than most stars twice her age. That attention didn't go unnoticed. Back in London, she was already becoming a studio favorite. Directors liked that she followed direction perfectly, but still added something of her own. No one could quite explain it. She was quiet, respectful, but then delivered a performance with a surprising heat that caught people off guard. During this time, Britain was still recovering from war. Rationing was in full swing. But Jean was getting fitted for costumes, stepping onto grand sets and showing up in magazines. For a country looking for escape, she became a symbol of post-war hope and a bit of fantasy. Producers began casting her in roles meant for older actresses. She had the look of a teenager, but the screen presence of a woman who'd lived through something. It made her unpredictable and hard to forget. The studios liked that, so did the public. What really set her apart, though, wasn't talent alone. It was how she made every close-up feel intimate. She didn't perform to the camera. She let the camera come to her. That kind of restraint, especially at 15, felt dangerous in the best way. Ophelia role that shocked all. At only 18, she was cast opposite Laurence Olivier, who also directed and starred as Hamlet. It was a bold choice. Some said she was too young, too unknown. But Olivier saw something in her others didn't. The moment the film premiered, critics couldn't stop talking. Her Ophelia was fragile but intense. The breakdown scene where she spirals into madness hit like a punch. She didn't scream or flail. She barely raised her voice, but her eyes, they told a story no one could look away from. One director on set said, "She didn't act the scene. She became it." That scene became one of the most talked about performances of the year. Some called it mesmerizing. Others said it was too much, too raw for such a young actress. The censors weren't thrilled either. They flagged her emotional scenes as too suggestive, even though she wasn't doing anything explicit. Just her face, sad, broken, and unfiltered, made people uncomfortable. Not because she did something wrong, but because she did it too well. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. It was rare for a British actress that young to get that kind of recognition in Hollywood, but Jean made it look effortless. What no one saw, though, was how tightly controlled the set was. Olivier was known to push actors hard. Simmons was often left exhausted after long takes. Some scenes took over a dozen tries just to get the right version of her breakdown. She never complained. Hamlet didn't just boost her career. It showed the world she wasn't afraid of complex roles. She didn't need flashy lines or big gestures. She used silence, stillness, and just one look. This wasn't a breakout. This was a warning. Jean Simmons didn't just belong in movies. She could change how they felt. Barefoot and bold in Himalayas. Jean Simmons wasn't the lead in Black Narcissus, but she might as well have been. She played Kanchi, a teenage girl from the Himalayas. No lines, no backstory, just movement, emotion, and presence. And it was enough to shake audiences and critics. She wore a thin sari, little makeup, and walked barefoot in most scenes. Her performance wasn't subtle. It was bold, sensual, and totally silent. For someone trained in British restraint, she went the other way completely. Viewers couldn't believe it was the same girl from Hamlet. The censors? They freaked out. A British girl in brownface was already controversial, but it was her physicality, how she walked, how she looked at men, how she moved through space, that made it feel charged. Some scenes were almost cut. Critics didn't know whether to praise her or scold her. What made it even wilder? Jean was only 19. She wasn't experienced in dance or physical theater. She learned everything on the spot, guided by directors Powell and Pressburger. They told her, "Don't think, just feel." And she did. The result was magnetic. Behind the scenes, Simmons was nervous. She worried about looking ridiculous. She hated the heavy body makeup. But when she saw the final cut, she realized she'd done something rare. She made people watch without saying a word. Her performance added tension to a film already full of it. Nuns fighting desire, isolation in the mountains, repressed emotions ready to blow. Jean's character was the spark, the reminder that human want couldn't be hidden forever. She wasn't glamorized. She wasn't polished. She was raw and young and almost too real for the screen. Audiences either gasped or looked away. That role changed everything. From then on, casting directors saw her differently. She could play quiet, yes, but she could also play dangerous. Not loud or messy, but the kind of dangerous that sneaks up on you. Marriage that silenced her voice. She married Stuart Granger in 1950. On paper, it looked like a Hollywood love story. He was a big name. She was the rising star. The press called them elegant, glamorous, perfect. But the truth behind the curtain was less romantic and a lot more complicated. Granger was 16 years older. He was already famous when Jean met him on set. Their chemistry started fast. So did the control. Soon after the wedding, Granger took the reins. On decisions, on deals, even on what roles she took. The studios loved the image. They paraded the couple in magazines. But people close to Jean started noticing changes. She lost weight. She got quieter on set. Her fire was still there, but it felt dimmed. Granger didn't hide his jealousy. He hated how much attention Jean got. When she was offered lead roles, he often stepped in, saying the scripts weren't right for her. Some insiders say he even turned down roles on her behalf without telling her. Their marriage became a talking point, not for romance, but for the tension it created in her career. One studio exec said, "Jean was gold, but we couldn't get to her without going through Stewart." Still, she stayed, at least for a while. She did interviews with a smile. She played the devoted wife, but behind closed doors, she started pushing back. She wanted control over her own contracts. She wanted to work in America. Granger wasn't happy about it. The tension spilled into work. On the set of Young Bess, she reportedly clashed with crew members over last-minute changes made by Granger, who was constantly advising from behind the scenes. By the early 50s, it was clear this marriage wasn't boosting her career, it was stalling it, and Jean knew it. The girl who once shocked the screen in silence was now fighting to speak up off it. She sued Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes didn't hear no very often, but Jean Simmons gave it to him clear, firm, and without a pause. In 1951, she was under contract with the Rank organization in the UK, but Hughes wanted her for RKO in Hollywood, so he bought her contract. At first, it looked like a career jackpot. Bigger films, bigger budget, international stardom. But there was a catch. Hughes didn't want to make her a star. He wanted to own her. He sent her lavish gifts, jewelry, perfume, clothes. She sent them right back. He offered her roles, but only in projects he controlled. Scripts were delayed, promises were broken. Jean was stuck, contractually tied to RKO but barely working. Then came the final straw. Hughes tried to force her into a long-term extension. Jean said no. He pushed harder. She pushed back and sued him. That was a career gamble very few actresses would have dared to make, especially against a man with Hughes' power and reach. The court battle was ugly. She was accused of being ungrateful, difficult, spoiled, but she didn't flinch. Her attorney argued Hughes was deliberately obstructing her career, and he was. The judge sided with Jean. The court granted her the right to make one more film under RKO, but after that, she was free. That final film would be Angel Face, more on that next. The whole ordeal made headlines. Jean had taken on one of Hollywood's biggest moguls, and won. What made it wild wasn't just that she fought back, it was how calm she stayed doing it. No public outbursts, no gossip columns, just quiet, steady defiance. After the case, other actresses started to take note. Simmons had done what they were told was impossible. She stood up to the system without destroying herself in the process. Slip-dress scene that stung. Angel Face was supposed to be just another noir, but Jean Simmons turned it into something unforgettable and nearly unwatchable for the censors. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film paired her with Robert Mitchum in a twisted love story full of mind games and manipulation. From her first scene, something felt off. In a good way, she wore a silk slip and moved through the frame like she knew exactly how much control she had. It was quiet, calculated, dangerous. Preminger pushed her hard. Some days, she left set in tears. One scene, where she slaps Mitchum, turned chaotic. He slapped her back. For real. Not in the script. The camera kept rolling. That take made it into the final cut. The most talked-about scene was filmed in her bedroom. Jean wore a skimpy nightgown that barely passed code. Her expression? Cold, unreadable, hypnotic. Studio executives tried to reshoot it. Preminger refused. Simmons never apologized. The scene stayed. Critics weren't sure what to make of her. One said she was too still, too unreadable. Another called her performance the quietest form of violence ever filmed. Audiences didn't know whether to root for her or run from her. That's exactly what Preminger wanted. Off-screen, Simmons kept it professional, but distant. She didn't like Preminger's style, but she respected the result. "It wasn't fun," she once said, but it worked. She knew what the role demanded, and she gave it, without blinking. Angel Face didn't do big box office, but it became a cult classic. Directors studied it, actresses copied her stillness, and fans replayed that one-bedroom scene like it was gospel. It proved she could lead a film, and terrify you doing it.
This wasn't Gene Simmons the ingenue, this was Gene Simmons with teeth, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Backless photo stirred a storm. The robe was supposed to be a biblical epic, clean, reverent, traditional, but Gene Simmons made sure it came with a side of scandal, not because of anything in the script, but because of a single photograph. A promotional shot of Simmons in costume, barebacked, turned slightly, eyes locked on the lens, made its way into a national magazine. And suddenly people weren't talking about Roman history. They were talking about that image. She wasn't unclothed, but she didn't need to be. The curve of her back, the look on her face, it was suggestive without trying. It sparked a wave of backlash from conservative groups. Some theaters threatened to pull the film unless the image was censored. The studio quickly ordered retouched versions covering her back with added fabric. Simmons didn't protest. She also didn't apologize. What most people didn't know was that the robe marked the beginning of her freedom. It was her first film after winning her legal battle with Howard Hughes and RKO. No more interference, no more stalled scripts. She was finally in control of her career, or so she thought. Behind the scenes, she was still untangling contract fallout. Though legally free, industry politics meant many producers were hesitant to cast her right away. Her refusal to play by studio rules made her difficult. So even as The Robe became a box office hit, Gene was still proving she was bankable and independent. She was also stepping into a new kind of role, the strong, morally complex woman. No longer the wide-eyed ingenue, she now played characters torn by faith, loyalty, and quiet desire. That's what made her stand out in The Robe. While others delivered grand speeches, Gene did more with a glance or a pause. Staring down Spartacus with fire. By the mid-1950s, Gene Simmons had mastered the art of subtle danger. She didn't have to raise her voice or storm into a room to command attention. One stare from her could flip the energy of an entire scene, and nowhere was that more obvious than in Spartacus. She played Varinia, strong-willed, patient, deeply loving. But she wasn't just the love interest. She was the emotional core of the film, the quiet resistance behind Spartacus's rebellion. When Kirk Douglas's character meets her, she doesn't beg or flirt. She watches, she listens, and that look, equal parts softness and defiance, spoke volumes. The film was massive, huge budget, massive cast, but Simmons never got lost in the crowd. Even surrounded by warriors and senators, her presence held steady. One key scene in a bathhouse, fully clothed but emotionally bare, had audiences holding their breath. She wasn't there to seduce, but somehow she did. Director Stanley Kubrick said she could do more with silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue. And that was true. She didn't rely on flashy performances. Her strength was restraint, holding back just enough to make viewers lean in. Her chemistry with Douglas was real, on screen at least. Off-screen, things were more tense. Douglas, ever the perfectionist, reportedly tried to direct her at times. Gene didn't bite. She followed Kubrick's lead and stuck to her style, one that didn't need constant rehearsal or rewrites, just space to breathe. What made Spartacus different was that it showed how far she had come. She was no longer being told how to act, dress, or behave. She chose this role, and she shaped it into something bigger than what was on the page. By now, Simmons had developed a signature move, holding the camera's gaze just a second too long. It was never overdone. Just enough to make the audience shift in their seats. That was her gift. Making discomfort feel beautiful. Making modesty feel provocative. Post-divorce roles, no apologies. When Gene Simmons divorced Stuart Granger in 1960, Hollywood expected her to fade into the background. Instead, she did the opposite. She stepped into some of the boldest roles of her career. She wasn't trying to shock anyone, but she was finally calling the shots. And the first move? Elmer Gantry. In the film, she played Sister Sharon Falconer, a preacher with power, mystery, and unshakable confidence. Opposite Burt Lancaster, Simmons didn't flinch. Their chemistry felt electric, even hostile at times.
Her character wasn't there to be conquered. She had her own mission and her own secrets. The role marked a shift. This was Jean fully in control. No studio head pulling strings, no husband weighing in, and it showed. Critics called her performance chillingly calm and quietly commanding. Audiences saw a version of Simmons they hadn't before, fierce, focused, and completely in her element. After that, the walls came down. In interviews, she started to speak more candidly. She admitted how controlled her earlier career had been. She talked about being dressed like a doll, told where to sit, when to smile. "I wasn't rebellious," she said. "I just had a brain." She also started choosing roles that mirrored her real-life complexity. In Life at the Top, she played a woman trapped in a cold marriage, giving one of her most emotionally raw performances. Critics noted how much pain she conveyed without raising her voice. Simmons had always known how to make silence speak, but now it screamed. By 1964, she had officially left her ingenue past behind. Her new characters were layered, modern, and sometimes bitter, but never weak. Whether playing women burned by love or cornered by power, Simmons always brought a sharp, grounded realism. Her personal life, she kept it quiet, no tabloid stunts, just work, and that work spoke volumes. Jean Simmons had survived the studio system, defied Hollywood men, and walked away from a toxic marriage. What came next wasn't a comeback, it was her full arrival. TV role that changed everything. In 1983, when most of her peers had faded into cameos or early retirement, Jean Simmons made a move that surprised everyone. She went to television. And not just any TV role. She signed on for The Thornbirds, a sweeping, high-stakes miniseries that would become a cultural event. She played Fiona Cleary, the cold, emotionally distant matriarch of the family. It was a huge shift from the warm, gentle characters people associated with Simmons. Fiona wasn't cruel, but she wasn't loving either. She was closed off, wounded, and quietly ruthless. And Jean played her with absolute control. Audiences didn't just watch The Thornbirds, they devoured it. Nearly 100 million people tuned in. Simmons held her ground against heavy hitters like Richard Chamberlain and Barbara Stanwyck, and in some scenes she stole the spotlight entirely. It wasn't just the lines she delivered, it was how she sat, how she paused, how she looked away at just the right second. For that performance, she won the Emmy. But more than that, she won back visibility. She proved that actresses over 50 weren't just background players. They could lead, they could drive a story, and they could be just as bold, if not bolder, than they'd been decades earlier. Behind the scenes, Simmons was calm, professional, and laser-focused. Younger cast members described her as gracious but guarded. She wasn't there for gossip, she was there to work. One crew member recalled, "She'd walk onto set, say almost nothing, and nail it on the first take." That role capped off her transformation, from teenage ingenue to Hollywood rebel, from silent power to full-on matriarch. She had nothing left to prove, but somehow still delivered performances that left audiences stunned. Jean Simmons didn't reinvent herself, she just kept showing up exactly as she was, smart, subtle, and impossible to ignore. And by the time The Thornbirds aired, one thing was clear. She never needed to scream to make the whole room gasp.